Good evening, and welcome very, very much to Conversations, where I'm very pleased to welcome to the program Marilyn Mach Vos Savant. And Marilyn is in a unique position in terms of world society in that she's been identified in the most recent edition of, to be coming out of the Guinness Book of Records as the most intelligent person in the world, having had an IQ test validating her intelligence that puts her in that position. And Marilyn, welcome very, very much to Conversations. It's a great pleasure to meet you.
Ah, thank you. My pleasure.
I wonder if you might share. This is a unique position that you hold in a certain sense, and you have a very interesting life as well that we want to talk about in a great many dimensions. But is the intelligence that you have, which puts you in this unique position again, one that was recognized early on in your life, or was this something that was recognized in the early tests and so forth when you were a young child?
Yes. Well, it was recognized very early, but you know how it is. All parents think their kids are smart.
Oh, yes. Right. Much less the ants.
Yeah. It seems ever since then. The last time I took a test was about a year ago. I take a lot of experimental tests now.
Yes.
I do favors for people that way. And so I've known about this all my life. It's just the world out there who hasn't known.
It hasn't. In fact, the world's only just coming to know the fact that you are in this position, and it's only just now that is being published. There was in the Guinness Book of Records that you were in that position, and you've been leading a relatively quiet life without making a great fanfare out of the fact that this was registered in the records and so forth.
The life of a recluse.
Yes.
Actually, I've lived under a pseudonym for many years now, and I rather liked it.
Yeah, and that was by choice. You decided that you just as soon not have the world be aware of this fact.
Yes, that's because I was writing,
Right.
and I wanted to avoid possible premature publication. I wanted to get decent enough before the work was published.
You wanted to hone your craft.
Yes, and so I worked under a pseudonym for several years as a writer. Before that, I was in the investment business.
I see. And writing, you think of yourself, that's one of your favorite forms of expression now, is writing. You're a writer now, and you're doing writing now as we talk.
I love it, although my favorite form of expression is speech over television.
Yes, right. Well, good.
To reach lots and lots of people.
To reach lots and lots of people now.
Yes,
right?
because so few people walk into a bookstore, you know.
Yes.
Something like 1 in 10 people has bought a book in about the past year or 2 years, something like that.
It's going down, too. I think in the television, the other kinds of medium are coming on more and more in terms of communicating with great numbers of people.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. I wonder, you've given a great deal of thought, as you say, you've taken tests with people who have been concerned with this question of intelligence and IQ and so forth. You've learned some just almost by osmosis or in general being in that milieu. But what is it, when we're talking about intelligence and with the measurement of what we call intelligence and so forth, what are we dealing with, really? I mean, intelligence is, do you have a definition of it? Is a dictionary definition a valid thing to begin with? Or what do we mean when we say intelligence?
Well, intelligence and IQ would be two quite different concepts.
Yeah.
Now, intelligence would be what I call one's overall parameter of abilities, in that a dog inherits a dog's brain, and you inherited a human brain, and the dog obviously has bounds which you do not share. Even if you take the dog to college and he sits in the front row of the class and he never barks, he's still not going to appreciate Shakespeare.
That's right.
So we know this is something he inherited. He inherited that dog's brain. Now, IQ is something else entirely. IQ is just a measurement, probably not a very good measurement, of how much we're able to profit by experience. In other words, how good we might be expected to do in school. But these are quite different things. IQ can't possibly measure intellectual capacity to its parameters, because we don't use that large a portion of our brains. We just use 5, 10, 15%, something like that.
Maybe we're going to be using more, possibly?
Maybe.
Yeah.
But the IQ, at the very most, could only measure what portion of our brains we're using. Now, I doubt very, very much that it does that. I'm just saying at the most, that's what it could possibly do. But I doubt it very, very much.
Yeah, but I'm wondering if we were to say, if we have intelligence, the ability to perceive, the ability to see patterns, the ability to reason, the ability to do problem solving, and this kind of thing. Maybe put the question differently. If we were to say the whole sum of human consciousness minus intelligence, as it were, is feeling, intuition, other kinds of aspects of human consciousness, something apart from intelligence, or where does intelligence fit in terms of overall human consciousness? If you can understand what I'm saying. Is it a summation of them all, or how do you see that?
you did throw in intuition, which I would not have done, because I think that's an intellectual function.
You do?
I don't believe that's at all mystic. I believe that has more to do with perceiving signals that other people are unable to perceive, simply don't notice. As versus, well, when you were mentioning, though, what part that would be of the human consciousness.
Yeah, well, what would be what feelings, let's say? Is that something that's part of human consciousness, or?
Yes, I would say that feelings are something that impinge upon the intellectual functioning, but should probably be considered separate from it. Probably what a lot of us do is think emotionally, and we should not.
You think we should not, right? Or learn from our feelings, or some people have used intuition to be that which is the suspension of judgment in a certain sense of a conscious process of which we're a part. But you feel that intuition is encompassed within the notion of people who are
I definitely think intuition is right in a function of intelligence.
You think it is?
I don't think there's any question about it.
Okay.
It depends on how much you see versus how much the next person sees. Now, it may not mean that you are more intelligent. We were just speaking of intellectual functioning. You may simply be motivated more than the person seated next to you. He or she may be preoccupied or just not care.
And some people have a higher intelligence, as it were, greater ability to perceive and so forth, and problem solve and so forth. And how can we account for the differences that exist, let's say, first without talking about the differences between the human species and the other biologicals, but within the human species itself, how can we differentiate, or how do we account for the differentiation in the ability of levels of intelligence in the human society? It's a matter of genetics? Is it a matter of conditioning? Is it a matter of nurture? How do we account for the differences that do obviously exist among the members of the human society?
I would say it's probably all those things, but in addition, I would say that we are born with enormous capacity, and that our experiences thereafter defeat that we progressively become less and less not intelligent, because we don't exactly lose brain cells that way, but we function less and less well intellectually, depending on our conditioning. For example,
that might be our potential as we're born, or something in that sense. We have a certain intellectual capacity that would be intrinsic to ourselves as we're born.
Yes, I think it's enormous. I think we all have enormous potential, and if we are raised in the quote right unquote way, or if we happen to have that combination of circumstances and motivation, etc., some of us will come out to appear very intelligent, at least on an IQ test, and others will not. Whereas I believe if the two babies were the same and brought up identically, they would be coming closer. Although you have different clay to begin with. When you have child A and child B, they are going to have different experiences.
And there are differences which are genetically related, in a sense. And
yes, there would be some. But I would say that we are born with vast potential, and that very few of us use it. If we all used our potential, all of our potential, then we would find out who the brightest people are. This would be someone else. It wouldn't be me. If we all used 100%, we'd find a brain that is actually wired in a superior fashion.
Wired in a superior fashion?
Let's say, put together in a superior fashion.
Yes.
But this is not me. It's probably not you. We'd have to use all of our brains before we'd find that out.
Yeah, we might be able to find some sort of pattern emerging out of it would be marvelous, wouldn't it, if the whole of humanity were operating in a maximal kind of way?
Yes, it would.
The pattern could emerge.
I think it has to do a lot with motivation, I'm afraid.
It does,
I think motivation, perseverance, and hard work.
And it also has to do with, it does also then have to do with the genetic structure, as it were, or the construction, as it were, of the brain itself. I don't know, there's something like 10 to the 11th power, the number of cells within the brain, and the brain isn't hardwired as a computer is. You said wired. It's connected with these neurotransmitters, and there's a difference. It's a biochemical process that intercombinates the cells of the brain.
Yes, but one that you often influence.
Yeah, but you influence that, and is the influencing of the various ratios of neurotransmitters and so forth a function of genetics or something that gives
it would also be a function of conditioning. For example, if one becomes depressed, one alters one's brain chemistry.
Oh, absolutely, yes, right. Or one's brain chemistry will be altered if one is depressed. Yeah, it's a model for consciousness.
Yes, I mean you can check that in a blood level.
So it is the brain is made, or the brain itself and the nervous system is made up of this It can also be, yeah, it can be affected by life's experiences, or it can be that there is this firing of mechanisms to give a system that make for consciousness and perception and so forth, that is a function of these various neurotransmitter ratios, and these vary within people. I just
sure, they vary within people, but a lot of that may have to do with conditioning.
You think it would have to do with conditioning?
I think it probably has a lot to do with it. I see that people who are extremely motivated, hardworking, and persevering often come out with superior IQs.
Superior IQs to people who are not? Or
yes, to people who are not.
So now, you can work on it, right? I mean, it can be improved by life experiences in a sense.
Yes, however, if a parent puts the child's booties on the fast track, as I call it, when they're only six months of age, I think this will artificially raise the child's level of intellectual functioning, but only to a certain point, because a motivated parent is not a motivated child, and you see more and more pressure as time goes on, and finally the child walks out, because you see a lot of, well, it's the 14-year-old who's going to Harvard.
Yeah.
You hear about these people 20 years ago. Why am I not hearing about them now? A lot of them have become ill. They're not functioning as well as you would think,
gee, that's
unfortunately.
Interesting, right.
But that's because of the social problems.
It's a function of the social problems and the intel. Do you think that the society in general is well suited for realizing and allowing the intellectual capability of its citizenry to manifest itself? I mean,
no, not at all.
That's a major problem. I know you're concerned.
Oh, it's a major problem. There is no society which does.
Why is it? Do you think that we're so predicated against that? What are the parameters of the reality? Is it concerned with material realities, or what is it that makes it so that we have such a hard time allowing the intellect to really flower or blossom as perhaps it is to do in the future, perhaps?
I think one of the problems is compulsory schooling. And that the children are sitting there and they are taught and told what to believe. They are passive from the very beginning. And one must be very, very aggressive intellectually to have a high IQ. That is one thing that I think I do have. I think I'm very aggressive intellectually.
And learn things and find things interesting.
And it's more aggressive in understanding. It's not, I'm not talking about motivated, in other words, intellectual motivation. I would not be that interested in going to the library and taking out all kinds of books.
There's a lot of books. Yes.
Yes.
But what did you mean in aggression? I mean, aggressive in terms of intellectually aggressive.
Because the child is taught right from the beginning it's a passive process. He or she sits there, and they simply try to believe everything they're told. For example, a 5-year-old will believe anything, and anything we tell him. A 95-year-old will not.
Won't believe anything you tell them.
Won't believe anything you tell them.
Set in the ways, right?
Yes, so right from the beginning, people begin to believe what they're told. They begin to read what they believe what they read in the newspapers, what they hear over the radio, what they hear on television, and they're prone to just be counting on someone else telling them what to think, and they never learn to think independently.
It's unfortunate.
I would rather not see compulsory schooling.
You'd rather not see compulsory schooling. Would that be for the great mass of people, or would that be for everyone in a certain sense, and or just for people that are of a particular? Maybe this is a value-laden question in a sense, but for everyone. I mean, are there some people who will not fit well except within an outer-directed environment, that they're more comfortable in a structured, outer-directed, less ambitious intellectually environment than some other people, and perhaps genetically suited for that?
Oh yes, I suppose that would be a factor also. I would certainly say it is. But if we allowed kids to become very, very motivated, learn how to go out and do things on their own, which is one peculiarity in my upbringing. I can't say that it's bad or good, but it is interesting because it's different. So I will relate it just for a moment, that I had an extraordinarily permissive upbringing, which means that as young as I was, and this goes back as far as my memories take me, I didn't have a curfew. I had to take care of my own meals, took care of my clothing. And if I asked my parents a question, and they were very loving people, mother was there all the time. If I asked her a question, one of the typical silly childish questions, why is, that sort of thing. She would say, I'm not here to entertain you. You should go out and find the answer to that question. Yes. And you have this childish curiosity, and you're delighted with everything. Everything's fascinating.
That's right. Children are.
When you're a child. And if you learn how to go out and get the information, you can hardly be stopped.
Yeah, that's
later.
Right. If there are patterns, if there are ways for you to find the information.
Yes,
you want,
see, the United States is great for this because we do have the history books.
Yeah.
We have things there that weren't burned.
We have the Carnegie libraries that
disappeared.
we've had, and there have been access to information for people who want to do it. It's a question,
this
perhaps,
is wonderful. The encyclopedias and their public libraries all over. It's wonderful in the States for bright people, very bright people. It's great here.
Well, it is, and it's better that they be in a position where they're finding out some information that they themselves want to find out rather than remembering what someone else wants them to remember for some purpose. Don't you think? I mean,
yes, also.
Generally, I mean.
I would teach children also, I would teach a few things to them is how to read different sources. Get them a paper who is a paper that leans left, get them a paper that leans right that day, and show them the difference in the headlines about Reagan or whoever it is. This would be the kind of thing to teach kids. So you would tell them, in essence, to be opening their minds, not to be closing them, not to be drawing conclusions. We have little 5-year-olds drawing conclusions. It's a pity.
I wanted to ask you a question. One, whether there's a correlation in your mind, if there's a difference or a correlation in your mind between the concept of intellectual development, intellectual capability, and creativity, which is a fact. But I wonder if I could preface that or put that on the side for a second and say I saw a disturbing article about creativity as a human condition. And they said that children who are around 5 years old have a certain attitude toward the environment about them that is creative, as they can measure these things, that in the 3 or 4 years following 5 years old, they tend to lose something like 70 to 80% of this quality of creativity that's intrinsically that.
They become more and more structured. I believe it's partly to do that passivity.
In a sense. Yeah, right.
I believe it's due more to the passivity with which they are raised.
They're becoming more and more
because
socialized.
Everybody's going into kindergarten and told, you can't write simply legibly and have your own style. You must write the way the teacher writes it on the board.
Yes,
and you will see this is the proper way to write a D. Even though it's maybe perfectly legible for one person, everything is very, very structured.
Why
and I
are
don't
we
think this is good for the intellect.
I understand. We've had others, John, Dewey, and other people who have, counseled different kinds of Montessori, other kinds of different ideas of education and so forth. But why do you think it is that the society is geared that way toward encouraging people to become so outer-directed rather than being able to become inner-directed intellectually themselves, and very often driving people to learn something rather than allowing them to learn the tremendously exciting things that make up reality? I mean,
it's politically and socially safer to be able to have the masses under control. The government doesn't want us all thinking for ourselves. We might have anarchy. So in a sense, it is expedient to have people controlled this way, to know what you're going to put in those history books, etc. I'm not saying that there's any sort of plot afoot to thwart young minds, simply that this is a reasonable thing to do. If we gave all children an education in capitalism and socialism and fascism, we're drifting into, I'm getting economics mixed with politics.
Yes, right, yeah. It's easy to do, yes.
Yes, but if we gave them a lot of different economic textbooks and political textbooks, we would have a real mess, probably. Our system of government would break down. So it seems to make sense to do this, although I think that sort of tethers all the minds to home base then.
Do you think it might be economically, because it ties into the way in which the socialization process takes place, not only in the United States, but around the world? And we're talking in a certain sense about world humanity, and intellectualism is part of the intellectual capability is part intrinsic to each of the members of the human society. And systems tend to be, educational systems and other socializing systems tend to be those which are creating outer directedness on the part of people around the world. It's not just one political system. But do you think it has to do with some of the materialistic concern, or the concern of the parents, or the concern of the parent entities in the society for trying to make the person become practical so that they're going to be able to be a practical, functioning member and earn their living and make their way in the society? Because for so long throughout the human experience, the material realities and the economic realities were very, very oppressive and so forth. I don't know, it's just a thought that came to my mind, whether it has to do maybe with the grounding and the economic systems are inherently, in a certain sense, oppressive.
Yes, well, the government wants them that way,
you think?
too. Well, sure, they can have better control that way, and I understand that. I don't think there's anything terribly wrong with it. I think they need that control to function.
James Joyce once wrote, if I may, James Joyce once wrote, or had Daedalus say, the history is a nightmare from which we are awakening. I wonder if you think...
Oh, that's a wonderful quote.
Yeah,
wonderful
well,
quote.
that we are awakening.
I disagree that we are awakening, but...
Well, if we are, maybe he hadn't said, I'm not sure, even myself.
Wonderful
I think
quote.
it may have been from which we were attempting to awaken, or to find
yes.
the means to
That would be
awaken
nice.
from, or something
I don't
of that
see
sort.
how it can be done. You can't get rid of the history books, can you?
You can't get rid of the history books.
Not a good
but
idea.
Can you through time, and do we through time? And if we carry that metaphor back further through the whole, after all, there was a consciousness before there was human consciousness, or Australopithecine, through time and so forth. And
Are you postulating that?
well, yes, right. There was a yes, I would have postulated that there was a consciousness existent within the evolution of a broader consciousness before there was humanity. I mean, there were Australopithecine, there was Neanderthal, there were other systems through time. And that were
Okay, so
coming,
you're
but through time,
equivalent.
if we take a time concept, if we may be approaching a time where through the economic systems and perhaps the ability of the technological systems to be in a certain sense liberating of the human psychological or intellectual capability in a way that historically, rather than being a plot on the part of machinations of political people,
Yes,
that we've
I
all
get
been
that.
caught in a situation that perhaps we're on the verge of leaving. I wonder if you're optimistic concerning the future of the human prospect in terms of perhaps liberating the intellectual capabilities we begin to look ahead, or just a broad philosophical reading, if you can follow all of that.
Oh, I wonder, you really ask me if I'm optimistic about that.
Yeah.
I would say no, I'm not too optimistic about that, but I've learned not to expect change as fast as I used to. For example, in the area of the history of females, or in the history of black people, when you give this to a child, give them accurate history texts, as accurate as we know them, and of course they're all biased to the country, naturally, that's understandable. But when the children read, what have black people done throughout history? Virtually nothing. What have women done throughout history? Virtually nothing.
It's done more than
It
what
is,
was said, but
it is, you know,
Yes, sure.
I'm comparing them
Yes.
to the white man.
Yeah.
And people have asked me, what do I think of the future for blacks? What do I think of the future for women? And I would say, in these two particular cases, and I'm hoping we can go from the
Yes.
particular to the general, I don't see much hope because we can't wipe out history. And when the young black child reads what it's like, having it in perspective, what the black person has done, or what the woman has done, they have this conditioning right in the beginning of how it's been in the past. There's not that much expected of them, and so I think it's this way with many things, because we have all the past to deal with.
But how do we relate to that past? And are we not able to, at some point,
I think it slows down
transcend the past? We can transcend the past, relate to it, find patterns to a future that can be encompassing of that past, maybe beyond the dialectic.
Certainly, the more
something?
intellectual people, but we're not talking about intellectually motivated people in the States. We are very intellectually passive.
You think they are?
Because of the system of schooling.
Because of the system of schooling, the
sure.
whole socialization
Yes,
process.
kids just sit there. The teachers don't like for them to ask questions, and I understand that. It holds everything up.
It holds everything up from according to the curriculum standard of what they're supposed to be doing, and that
Yes,
kind of thing.
right. Something
So,
I also find
yes.
ridiculous is giving 10th graders Shakespeare.
Why?
Now, maybe they just know a lot more than I do, but I didn't understand Shakespeare until I was 30. And when I see a high school kid groaning because they're reading Romeo and Juliet, I understand why they're groaning. They're miserable. They don't understand what's going on.
Don't you think there's something that's very depressing about, given the fact that learning things, learning events, learning patterns and so forth, is such an exciting proposition, and secondly that, let's say, biology, physics, the realities of biology, physics, and all of the aspects of the systems that make up reality are so inherently interesting that it's a shame so many people in the name of education are being made to do something. They feel like
yes.
quarry slaves being made to do something that they don't want to
Yes,
do. Isn't there
especially
something
in an effort-
fundamentally...
There's something very wrong with that.
It does seem,
especially in what I call a misguided effort to be well-rounded. Why not let one person go and become another Einstein in his or her field? It doesn't have to be something as impressive as physics. There are all kinds of things. But in this effort to make a well-rounded individual, we sort of turn them all off to everything, give them things too early. The other day, not the other day, this was the other month, a 19-year-old was complaining to me about the junk, he called it junk, he had to read. And he had Shakespeare there. Now, I was looking through it. Yes,
junk.
this is junk. He's calling it junk.
Well, yeah.
And I said, do you know what this means? One of the lines I thought was beautiful, and I may not be quoting it accurately. I said, "'Tis sleep doth knit the ravelled sleeve of care." This is a thrill to read that. When you understand that line, he said, "I have no idea."
Yeah, right.
He's too young.
All right.
He's too young.
He's too young. Or
That's
it's
a
not,
pity.
Yeah, it's not of his. It's not at his level or of his interest in it.
I think it was too young.
Yeah.
Most 19-year-olds don't know that. What a shame that we didn't just let the people go who would have loved that and just go off into that area rather than forcing it on everyone.
Yeah, you had a very interesting, if I may, in some of the literature you've written, you have written on the concept of intelligence, and we do want to get on with your career. You're a writer, and you're doing important things with that and so forth. But you had an interesting research in terms of, I think it was people at Stanford who had tried to get some reading of the intellectual level of some of our historical figures, Voltaire and Pasquale. Maybe to share a little bit of that, and then we could talk some about how many people there are within our society at levels comparable to, in terms of intelligent capability, of the great masters and so forth and so. But maybe you could share a little of the work of Catherine Cox, if you could.
We have millions of Einsteins walking around. We have millions of Voltaires who are doing virtually nothing with their capabilities, and I'm not surprised. Catherine Morris Cox did a study back in, I think it may be 1926, something like that. I believe it was called Genetic Studies of Genius or Genetic Studies of Geniuses, probably published by the Stanford Press, in which she and about 4 other PhDs and one person who was an educator, and they did a study trying to determine the IQs on the Binet scale, which is the one everyone's familiar with, 100 is average, of eminent people who lived between the times of 1415 and 1850, something like that. They discounted royalty because royalty was only in the position because of, nepotism, but took eminent people, and looking back at their writings, early judgments that were made on their progress, but only hard evidence, not looking in terms of life accomplishments, but rather what evidence did they leave in writing and
of
that sort of thing. Yes, of their intelligence.
Right.
The people who came out on the top, and John Stuart Mill topped the top with 190. Oh yes, John Stuart Mill.
Great.
But in general, they were writers at the top.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And revolutionary leaders ranked somewhere near the bottom of the scale. U.S. presidents.
Musicians were low.
They were very low. Yes, painters,
right.
etc.
Painters and.
But see now, but you have to understand the way she judged this.
Yeah.
I only briefly touched on it in my book, but her book is several hundred pages long.
Yes, right.
So you have to understand that as a Michelangelo, perhaps, now I'm guessing, may not have been the slightest bit interested in her learning how to read. This doesn't mean he could not have done that. He may have just been tremendously interested in his paintings. Right. So I think it's really a very unfair
Well, it might bring us back to that
method.
question. Well, all right. And it might also bring us back to that original question of what intelligence is vis-a-vis other aspects of human consciousness. The question of musicians and painters very often are concerned with feelings and emotions and things that may not score well in by terms of what we call intelligence. And tends to be left. Do you think it tends to be left hemisphere, linear kinds of perceptions that are favored, as it were, in a certain sense, against feelings?
Well, there is certainly
what we call intelligence.
I would say there's certainly an influence, but not enough influence to take into consideration, since we're just using far too small a portion of our brain to take that into consideration.
Maybe
I was going to mention motivation. If you have a Michelangelo who is motivated to do one thing, and you have a Jonas Salk who is motivated to do something else entirely. And so we may say Jonas Salk was brighter where possibly Michelangelo was. We won't know that. But in that motivation, there's another interesting thing. I think motivation plays a far greater part than most people realize. And one example would be, if we suppose for a moment that you're a 40-year-old man and you suffer a stroke, you have been in the prime of life, you're doing very well, you're active, etc. You have a stroke and you lose your ability to walk. Now, the portion of your brain that was devoted to that was damaged or damaged beyond repair or destroyed.
In the stroke, as opposed to the muscles of the legs or something.
Let's say, or an accident, where you have a gunshot wound or something. Now, given not too much damage, naturally, and motivation, within a year, 2, 3, 5, that men may very well indeed be walking again. Now, you know that if he's not motivated, he will never walk again. It takes tremendous motivation to learn to come back from a stroke that way.
Absolutely.
Now, What did he do? He used more of his brain. He used a different portion of his brain.
That's interesting. Yeah, that is interesting.
Yes, and I believe that is well documented, at least to the extent that I have been able to document it, and I usually don't think things are well documented.
Yeah,
This, I think, is fairly well documented, and one must go back to the notion of babies, whom I said had enormous potential. One would have to consider what might happen if all babies were born with the motivation of that 40-year-old stroke victim. May they use 25% of their brains? Might they use 50? If we use 90% of our brains, the world would be a different place.
It would be a different
Whoever
place.
did that would be changing.
Can you see that happening? Can you see that happening? Using that we'll be able to use more and more, and that
I can see that. I think some of us may already be doing that, but I doubt that it's any sort of figure in the sense that we were talking about, because almost all, even relatively normal upbringings will not duplicate the circumstances of this stroke victim.
It's a question
but
of how,
I think that motivation is tremendously important.
It isn't a question of how we can motivate people to become that way in a very real sense. No?
No, I don't think we can motivate other people.
How people can allow themselves to motivate themselves to be able to be interested?
I'm afraid
how
so.
How do we deal with it? How that kind of thing? Or another interesting question would be that if we go through the human history of Periclean Greece, we have periods of incredible outpouring of the Renaissance. Then we have other periods of long periods of dark ages where very little relatively is done in terms of human accomplishment, and obviously one
yes, and what some people call the Dark Ages.
Or whatever, you know, or even if we go back pre-Cro-Magnon or something like that through the human. There were periods of motivation in a sense that sociologically it was a period of great flowering and so forth throughout certain periods of history and so forth.
It would appear that way, but I mean, I'm sure you're too intelligent to discount the effects of disease and economic privation and all these other things.
No, well, these other kinds of things would have been part of a condition, would have made it difficult for people to be able to be heavily motivated toward doing something that would give them the motivation, that would turn on their brain to be able to go out and develop their intelligence and so forth. And do you think we live at a creative era now in terms of a longer sweep of human history? Or as we begin to look ahead, creative perhaps the wrong word, a time comparable to a Renaissance, or that more and more people, are more and more people going to be able to become motivated in the sense that we were talking about as we begin to look ahead? I mean, are you up?
I would say that we are not.
Maybe it's a little different. You know?
Oh, yes, you did ask in a sense, but perhaps this is why I don't see as much hope as you perhaps.
I'm trying to find, right? Trying to be optimistic about things.
But I don't see it there either, in the sense of being a more creative time or a more motivated time. The only motivation I see is on the part of parents trying to motivate their children, and what I see are technological advances, but not intellectual advances. Naturally, we have technological advances because we can stand on the shoulders now of many, many others.
Yes,
we do not need to reinvent the light bulb because all this was passed down in writing.
Yeah.
So.
And we do have, the technology is an extension in a certain sense of our consciousness or of our intelligence. I guess all of technology, really, electric lights, automobiles, all of technology is an extension of our consciousness into the environment in a very real sense. It's all coming out from inside. We can make the environment other than that which is given. We've even reached the point now where we have artificial intelligence, which is part of the projection of the computer. And I wonder what you think some of the implications.
Very crude, rudimentary.
But I'm just wondering what you think the implications are, particularly, again, in a realization that change is happening almost exponentially now in terms of technological capability against a 3 million year sweep of human history. But some of your thoughts about artificial intelligence, and you've given some thought to that, or have you? Or
yes.
How far can we go in terms of mimicking, as it were, or coming up with intelligent patterns comparable to human
I think
the
future of artificial intelligence is a great convenience for us all. I'm afraid it's not going to be much more than that, at least not in the foreseeable future. So we define artificial intelligence in some other way.
It's an extension.
It's fine because it effectively extends our lives. So instead of 75 years and one had to spend so and so much of it on calculations that the computer can now take care of. So if we have a good mind, we can have 80 years effectively out of him, even if he dies at 75, you know. So this is great.
Or maybe we can use those systems as augmentation or as surrogate, I don't know, functionaries within the economic system to free us away from the
Yes, we just to get more time.
To get more time.
Yeah, I think that's the best the use of them, to get more human time.
More time and allow us to have more, permissive, liberating social organizational assumptions so that we don't stifle intellectual capability so much in the name of practical economic necessity to be a surrogate robot that so many people have to do in order to earn a living.
Oh, right. Yes.
If you think too much, it's going to be not good for you because, you know, you're not going to be well accepted at the mill, that kind of thing.
Yes.
You know? Can you see a distinction, or have you thought in terms of intelligence or the difference between, we talk about the brain and the mind, do you see a distinction between brain and mind or not? I mean, whether or not there's a...
Well, I see a distinction, of course. The mind comes from the brain, in that if you didn't have your brain, I don't believe you're going to have a mind, but of course the loss of a limb will not affect your mind.
Yeah. The mind is
I don't think it's nearly as mystical as people think.
Yeah, well, probably not. It's sort of recognized patterns and so on. Well, we've been talking a lot about, the fact, and it is interesting because you've given a great deal of thought to this, and it must be interesting in a certain sense to be the world's most intelligent person. I think
well, I
in a
doubt
certain
that
sense
that's the case. Not many people have taken.
No, but I mean, as these things are measured, and as it's put out, and as these are recognized and put forth, you are in that position at this particular time, which is a very unique and interesting one, and so forth. That must be a little bit like feeling like Clark Kent in a certain sense, because you have this tremendous capability, which is intrinsic to the way you think. But you are also now, and I'd like to say, you want to write, right? Let's say, what do you want to do? You're a writer, right? Maybe
yes, I have thousands of pages written that I fear giving to people. Yes. I don't want to cause too much of a stir, because some of them will probably be controversial.
And you've been living, if I may, a life...
Political satires, especially.
Right.
You know, when you mentioned this, all the different things we've been talking about, right now what's happening is that the two of us and also other twos are touching on a lot of subjects about which I could speak for the next several weeks at the very least.
Yes, right. Yeah, there's so many different kinds of things. But you've been writing over the years, again, honing your craft. You've been doing this in, if I may, relative obscurity in terms of the world, but the world's beginning to take notice now
Social
of you.
Obscurity, too, I'll tell you that.
In a very real sense,
live the life of a recluse.
Well, you have been, but it's changing, right? Your life is changing and so forth. There's more and more attention now. The fact that you're here, rather than in your study back in the other parts of the country you've been living, you're going through a lot of changes these last few years and months, huh? Exciting.
Because someone disclosed my identity to the news media.
Yes.
Which was all right with me because I had already done the hardest work in writing, which is the very beginning, persevering and just getting to a publishable point. I had already done that and had several dozen things published under a pseudonym. Under a pseudonym. Thank heaven, before the press found out about this, because I was very afraid of premature publication.
That would be based upon the fact that you were this, if it were out that you were this person of such high intellectual capability, or high intelligence and so forth, that it would be given preference for being published other than the value of the work itself?
Right, yes, and that was something I absolutely did not want.
You didn't want to hype your work. You wanted to have your work be just totally integral?
No, if I wanted to do something just for money, I would stay in investments.
Yes, right.
I would have never turned to writing. So that was, it was my way of attempting to communicate to the great masses of people. And that's what I want to do with my work.
Right, okay.
But now, since this is since I've sort of been exposed to the media this way, I'm enjoying getting experience talking with people on the tours I've been taking. Lots of fascinating people I've met. And it's been very good to learn how to communicate with them verbally, because before I was just doing it on the written page. And so this is very nice too. But I really like television as the medium of communication. You can reach lots of people by television.
Well, television, I think, is probably becoming and is emerging, I don't know, there's holography beyond television, but it's more all-inclusive in terms of bandwidth, and it includes more information than print. Also, it's a very different perception. If you've had a chance to read the Gutenberg Galaxy, Mr. McLuhan and so forth said that print is much more of a linear kind of perception, and television is much more of a multi-sensuous kind of all-involved, inclusive kind of environment that is a different one. You have aspirations to do television, and you're doing some writing that looks towards television and film and stage and so forth too as well, right?
Oh yes, but we mean stage plays. That would be me as a playwright.
Yeah, right. I mean,
yes, I've done plays and books. A lot of the things that I've never shown to anyone yet. That as far as television is concerned, yes, we're discussing those possibilities too, because this is a wonderful way to be able to communicate with people. When one reads things in the paper, let's say, one has a more difficult time discerning if there's a bias. One tends to give it a little too much credence just because it is in print.
Yes.
And I like to see ideas explored on television, usually on a one-to-one basis, because if we have a panel of people, too many people can slip out of answers that that they shouldn't be slipping out of. What I would really like to do is discuss issues of the day or issues that are pertinent with people who are in the news, people who are doing something that is influencing other people. I'm not especially talking about a track star. Nothing wrong with being a track star, but he or she is not influencing other people's thinking. If there are people out there who are influencing other people's thinking politically, socially, etc., I think those people should be placed in a position right in front of them, not to, I'm not talking about being belligerent or taking everything apart, but let's discuss this all fairly from an independent viewpoint, no bias whatsoever, and let those folks out there find out about this person that they're following. I want them to get the truth.
Right, and maybe even share in the excitement of the decision-making process and intellectual process that person's involved in.
Oh, you know, I think
in a positive sense, right?
I think the most exciting thing is the dawn of understanding.
Yeah.
That's expansive. That makes me feel
dawn of understanding?
the dawn of understanding understanding a political figure.
Yes.
Let's say what he means when he says this to that group and this to that group. Seeing all that, for example, that's an education in itself. Take the president's speeches. Nothing against president, any president. To 6 different groups. Let's hear him talking to union people. Let's hear him talking at the factory gate, and let's hear him at a $1,000 a plate dinner. This is wonderful for people. There's a sense of relief in being able to understand, to find truth underneath all these words that are floating around, and that is something that I feel obligated to provide.
Oh, great. Okay.
I feel a definite responsibility, which is why I didn't want to bring out the more serious things I wrote sooner, because I feel that I have a tremendous obligation to be accurate, to be unbiased, to be totally fair. If someone is going to read what I write and give some credence to that, it has to be right. It has to be totally fair. No matter what my personal opinions are, or what might just happen to benefit me or the people I love, or something like that.
Truth.
But
you have a
fair,
sense of
right
integrity.
down
You have a sense of integrity for the truth, in a very real sense, in an abstract sense, right?
Absolutely. Now, this wouldn't be speaking off the cuff, but if I want to try to communicate this to people, I want them to hear the truth, or at least have an understanding of what we think is the truth, and try to show them why it might not be the truth, and how things got distorted over the ages. And the fire at Alexandria, for example, that warped all of our knowledge before. You have to think of things that were lost and that were later reconstructed, and explain to people, for instance, what happened in the monasteries and to the writings over the years.
It's a broad tablet. It's a broad tablet that you're talking. It's actually the whole of the human experience, in a certain sense, is to be shown and shown in such a way as to be able to give understanding and vision to the realities and new truths and so forth that are inherent in the human condition at the time.
Yes, but rather than going back and tracing that all through, which I think would be tedious for people, I don't think it would be entertaining.
But we
have
to keep track with history. Right?
Yes, yes. You just want to interview newsmakers, people who are anyone who has the gall to go out and influence someone's thought.
You think there's a difference?
I think should be exposed to someone who is going to get at the truth. Although I don't mean in a negative or belligerent sense, because I detest arguing, and I don't argue.
I understand. I understand what you're saying exactly like that. Do you think there's a difference between, let's say in human affairs, we have leaders, and obviously we have news media, we have people who've been doing that in terms of Mr. Reagan is covered very, very well by all sides and all angles and everything like that, being the president, and a man of great political power in a certain sense, and is able to commandeer a great number of institutions that affect people's lives and so forth. But do you think that there are, in essence, represents a leader in a very real sense? We also, or you could have said Medici at the time had such in Florence, but at the same time we had somebody who had great cultural influence of Michelangelo, or much more to the point, somebody who wasn't so well known. He happened to be very, very well known at the time, but I mean there was somebody who didn't. But there are people who are of influence. So that what you want to do is present the people who are, in a certain sense, leading edge leaders of fulfilling human purpose, and
well, leading edge, to me
vision.
that means a little bit avant-garde, so maybe we should go back up.
Or something,
but people who are
but it's not people just
influencing.
it's people that are influencing.
People who are influencing public thought.
Leaders.
That leaders would certainly be included. Columnists would be included, though. They influence public thought.
Yeah.
A movie critic influences public thought. All of these people. What I would like for them to have, and the public, and I don't see anyone doing it now, is for a figure, this newsworthy figure, and I don't mean a new movie star.
No, I know.
Movie critic,
yes,
not movie star.
Right. Well, unless they happen to be also
that too, of Vanessa Redgrave.
having something, but
yes,
tends
but
not to be.
I would like for them to know that they will be able to talk with me, and that I will not make an effort to make them look bad, and I will not make an effort to make them look good. They are going to get a totally fair shake.
Well, why not help make an effort to help make good if you can? Why not? I mean, if you can, help make them look good.
Because that has to do with, there's some distortion there.
Help them
and
bring,
I don't want to distort the truth.
Oh, you don't want to distort the truth, right? You don't want to, oh, I see. Well, okay, that's an
No,
interesting thing.
that would be promoting what I like.
No, I was saying you're going to help them be able to tell their story a little bit better. Maybe they're a little bit awkward with words or something, and you help them over and you help them tell their story a little bit better than...
Well, I could try to do that, but I doubt that I would be able to do that any better than someone who is spending all of his or her time at it.
Yeah, I understand.
I couldn't be presumptuous enough to say that I could.
I understand what you're saying, but that would be the intent of it. And it would be to help illuminate the excitement of that. Scientific figures, people who are making breakthroughs, or people... Jonas Salk at the time when he was about to make that breakthrough that was going to heavily influence the human condition. Scientific figures, people that are perhaps not in the limelight.
No, I wouldn't do that because he's not influencing thought.
Yeah.
Jonas Salk would not have been doing that. So we would not be likely to interview a person who discovers one of the cures for cancer.
No, somebody who was that.
Unless people are just tremendously interested in that, and that would be included too.
So you seem to think in terms of people who have political power, people in economic and political power, particularly you like to talk to because they're the ones who are influencing the human condition in the short run.
Anyone in the media,
in the media, in the news, or people that are in a position of influence, something like that. Well, I think you do very, very well in that because you're very personable. And
there would also be producers and directors.
Yes, right.
People who are putting on television programs. And I suppose it would include certain actors and actresses.
So if you have that kind of a thing, there are all kinds of people that have programs that do that kind of thing. We do that here. Other people do that. There are people that are doing that. And then you would like to have as wide a possible audience for that particular programming that you're doing as possible to help share that, in a sense, and with that, the excitement of that, with the widest possible audience?
Yes, that's why I think it would have to be entertaining. Because I think learning these things is really fun. It gives you a bit of a high to find out finally what's going on with this or that subject. And I think it can be a very pleasant experience.
You don't think it's possible that there could be, if you're in that position with people in political positions such as that they have a relatively parochial position in terms of a larger context of understanding? I don't know. I mean, the concept of leadership, I suppose it would come back in a very real sense to, in a certain sense, you would want to be able to present the perceptions of those who in a certain sense represent those who are leaders in the sense of fulfilling human purpose in a certain sense. If you understand. It's a
I don't know who that would be.
I don't know what that is either, but I mean, what is human...
I was trying to think of
I was trying to think of what human purpose is or what we're here for and that kind of thing. Or what do we mean if we say...
that could be.
If we say we're going to present or help present the perceptions of the world leadership, how do we define leadership? Or how would you define leadership in your position? You're a leader in a certain way, in an intellectual sense. How do we define leadership among the vast, billions of people that make up the human society? Who are our real leaders? And do we recognize them well in the economic and political process to be those people who we normally think of as leaders? Are they our real leaders? What about our poets, our philosophers, our other kinds of people of great perception that are
Well, I'm afraid our
fulfilling, you
leaders are
understand?
the political figures.
You feel
and,
that way,
You
yeah?
know, that's a problem. It's a very it's a problem basic to a democracy. There's probably not much you can do about it. Well, no, it's certainly basic to others, to other political systems also. But over here we have one man, one vote, and so naturally there's a problem. Politicians, by the nature of their trade, have to be dishonest. You know, it's unfortunate, but they have to tell people what they think the people want to hear in order to get them to vote for them. And I'm sorry about that, but I don't mean that they are a corrupt people. I don't believe they are. But in order to get people to give you a vote, you have to tell them what you think will please them or promise them something. And
so
that's sort of a shame.
It would be people in the news that, in a very real sense, something like that. You know, I ask you something. There was a survey taking a great number of people at one time asking journalists and so forth, people in television and that, what would be the most, I ask you a question if you don't mind, what would be the most outstanding news story, if we're talking news and that kind of, what would be the most outstanding news story that they could imagine be something that could be happening over the next, let's say, year? And there was one, everything grouped down here and one percentage down here, and then there was one 45 percentile above everything else that stood out as the #1 news story that possibly could occur as you looked into it.
Realistically speaking?
Well, they were just taking everything into account realistically, but what would be the most outstanding event that could occur that would be newsworthy in a certain sense as they projected it out? And one thing stood out way above everything else. And could you take a guess? And it's not fair maybe for you to do it. It's not fair, really. It's not
for
fair
me to think of it, I can think about 100 ridiculous things.
No,
but
you
mean
like
no, I
a
don't
man
know what
from
that
Mars
would be.
or a man? It would be the second appearance of Jesus was taken as that. Now that brings you into a religious system, and if you were doing this television thing at the time of Jesus, you would have been talking to Pontius Pilate when Jesus was not someone who was of spiritual, but you would still say that Pontius Pilate represented the leadership people, whose perceptions ought to be illuminated more than some other people. You know what I was saying?
You know what I was going to say?
There must be something beyond just the political process, which is a little bit parochial in a certain sense, that is fulfilling human purpose. You know
what I was going to say? The only thing I could really think of was that the evolution versus creation was finally discovered, finally resolved, whatever that was. But then, in a sense, see, now, I never would have said what you said, which is there would be a second coming, because that means that I believe there was a first coming. And I was not around back then, and there are a lot of people, most of the earth does not believe there ever was a first coming, naturally. And so I think it would be a little foolish for me to sit here in the United States and not have any idea what's going on in India, in the Orient, etc.
Right.
They certainly would not have said that. It was the second coming of whom?
Yeah, right. It's second coming of Krishna or something. I know there's all these different things. Well, it was just to, in a certain sense, say that. Well, I think absolutely television would be, the television, I personally would like to really thank you or welcome you very much to the television milieu. I think you'd fit in absolutely wonderfully well in terms of that, and I wish you all the very, very best as you begin to start thinking about that. You also proceeded with the writing and so forth. Now you're doing, and you like satire, right?
I love satire.
Right?
It's just because there are so many lessons to be learned that can be done in a very, very entertaining way. And to take the truth and expose it and allow people to laugh about it or show them how to laugh about it or make them laugh about it, it's such a pleasant way to learn. So that's why I like it especially.
It's a little hard to do satire, don't you think? Because in a very real sense, reality is so funny sometimes in and of itself. It's hard to improve upon the humor. There's content within reality.
Well, to me, that's what satire is. That's that's the way I write it.
To write satire,
truth is so ridiculous.
But to try and write satire, which is going to be an improvement upon the comedy existent within the human scenario or condition, is a little hard sometimes because it's so satirical. Sometimes
it has to do with picking out the funny parts, but people usually call that satire.
Yeah. Well, that makes it. It is funny and makes it an interesting.
It's like a caricature.
A caricature, right? Right.
That's what it is, and it can be very pleasant, and you can learn a lot from that.
And the writing for the stage and the writing for the film and the writing for television and so forth is a different thing than novels. And are you beginning to get a camera sense and so forth, or are you beginning to get a visual sense? Because the literary expression, the phonetic alphabet is so linear and so forth, but the visual component is a little bit different.
Yes, I was that way, but But back in the beginning, I wanted to write a play, so initially I was beginning to think visually. I have 2 plays written, a couple of political satires, and a series of political satires that would be something like half-hour features, lots of other things like that. And I'm working on collaborating on a screenplay with Disney Productions, a bunch of other things like that. But the thing that I think would serve people best, other than I would be served, would be having more direct access to people through television. Because books are nice, they make money, but not a lot of people buy them, and you can't really get through to people. Well, naturally, lots of people buy books, but it's not like they're talking with them over the television, excuse me. And I feel that I have an obligation to get to them that way, because I have never seen myself as segregated from the masses. I feel that I'm part of the large populace. I feel I'm part of the mainstream.
Yeah, and also you have a sense of these things that you understand and everything, that we can improve upon these things, so that you have a sense of a vision of how we can improve the human condition in a very real sense. It's a question of being able to communicate these things from your unique position, and it would seem to be you must be in a very exciting time of, in a certain sense, coming out in terms of your life. You're coming into a new
prominent. It is exciting that way, and I love it when people come to hear me lecture and they stay afterward and they say, "Oh, I see what you mean now."
Yeah, right.
And it has nothing to do with mysticism.
No.
This has nothing to do with a religion, reading minds, ESP, anything like that. It's just a matter of understanding what's going on
It's time
out
for
there.
Marilyn Mach Vos Savant to begin to communicate in a really effective way with the world in a way. And I would only just say I would really like to be able to see you do that, because you could bring great perception and vision to the world that is in need of that kind of vision and so forth. I really thank you.
Thank you.
Wish you all the best in all aspects of your career, and I certainly want to thank you for participating here in Conversations. It's been a tremendous pleasure talking with you.
Oh, same here. Like to come back.
All right, fine. That would be good. We'll check with you and see if we can't help you in terms of moving along. I would remind you again, we're running out of time, but I would remind you again, it's been your pleasure to have the Perceptions of Marilyn Mach Vos Savant, and again, the world's most intelligent and perhaps personable and communicative person, if we may say so. Very well suited to any medium she selects. But
that's very sweet. Thanks.
Welcome increasingly to the degree to select television. Right?
Thanks.
Thank you very, very much for viewing. It's been your pleasure. We'll be back again next week. We'll see you next week once again. Marilyn, thank you very much again. Good night. See you next week.
I think it's great.
Boy, I could talk to you for years, I think.